So, for those of you who are here watching this and you have no idea what this conversation is, today I'm going to be talking with Sari about her perspective on the tech landscape, where we see eye to eye, anywhere we might disagree, and how all this connects to what you guys at Sublime are building. Which I think is great. If you follow me on TikTok, you've definitely seen me talk about the Sublime before, non-stop recently. So if you're not on Sublime already, I don't know what you're doing. You should get on Sublime. So first of all, could you talk to us a little bit about how Sublime came about and what problems you're trying to solve with Sublime?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Lou. It's just a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned we're going to talk about the kind of tech landscape and are leading with the question of how Sublime came to be. And it's interesting that for so many people, Sublime is a utility tool, a tool to collect and save and connect ideas. They sort of use it like they would a bookmarking tool, but really kind of the story of Sublime and what set me on this path and journey was this sort of disenchantment with the state of the internet. There was
Yeah.
this kind of like feeling that I was after, and it's really just a feeling because it was this subjective thing of like, why do I feel a certain way when I go online? Why is it that everything feels like so distracting and overwhelming and like everything discourages reflection? And there were sort of like all of these things that I wanted that didn't exist. So for example, like I feel like I was discovering so many incredible hidden nuggets of insight on the internet, but I would never find those again if I were to Google them because the best signal stuff was not on Google. On the social media front, like, yes, there is a lot of like insights there, but it's like buried in this noise and this like performative, like, like attention grabbing, like casino like environment. And so, yeah, I sort of had this dream of why can't we build something on the internet that feels like it has the calm focus of a library with the sense of aliveness of a coffee. That was sort of
Yeah.
like the thing
Yeah.
that I wanted. And of course, like, the kind of visionary in me, like, I like, banged my head against the wall and I'm like, okay, like, let's take a step back and like fill in all of these gaps, practically speaking. But yeah, for me, like the thing that I was always yearning for was this feeling. And there was some utility embedded. Like, yes, I needed a place to save ideas. I needed a way to connect ideas, not just collect them. I needed a way to discover ideas. But all of that really was kind of secondary to this like feeling that I was yearning for.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. This is something I've written about in my Substack before and something I talk about to anybody who will listen. I'm a big fan of more whimsy in tech. That's the word I use to describe that feeling
Yeah.
because that's what I saw people using and it really resonated with me. Personally, as a designer, as a technologist, I'm really interested in how we can move beyond just pure rationality and productivity in tech design. And I think all of this is connected to really outdated ideas of human psychology about how we're just really input output machines and our feelings don't really make a big difference to our experience of the world and we should just ignore them and be rational. It's partly how a lot of persuasive design is justified because people think, oh, well, humans are rational, so you can just turn it off and ignore it if you really wanted to. It's framed as a willpower issue because of the same kind of rationality that just makes everything boring at the same time as it makes it really hard to draw yourself away from. How is it that you think technology can embrace this sense of whimsy and enhance really actual, genuine human creativity? And
I love
how does that approach? How do you implement that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, I love this question. I think I remember when I was a freshman in college and I took the Econ 11 class that I think a lot of people take. And I was like, I don't buy any of these ideas. Like humans are not
Yeah.
rational. Like this just doesn't make sense to me. It was basically like we behave like monkeys that if like one thing moves, we do something and we don't work that way. And I think that it's an interesting time because with all of this talk about artificial intelligence, there's this certain like ineffable quality that we all feel cannot be automated, right? That is like
Yeah.
beyond the grasp of the machine. You could call it like intuition, faith, whatever, but I feel like now, like for so long, we needed like productivity, like we needed to get everyone fed, we needed to just like for economic survival, like the right mindset was productivity. And I feel like now that so much of what we as humans have been doing, we're realizing machines can actually do more effectively. then there's this question of like, what are the things that we actually want to do that will
Yeah.
allow us to live more fulfilling lives? And I just feel like this is a question that it's a very important question. And I think from my perspective, the way that I think about it in Sublime is really twofold. One is like the product, like how can the product actually unlock that way of working and thinking? But I also think there's so much power in the messaging, right? Like so many tools that we use are about, like in the knowledge management space, which is the one that I operate in, so much of it is about speed. Like, do this without thinking, or, like create content at the speed of thought. And it's like, what are we encouraging there? It's like, is the point of being a human being able to click a button and like create content and share it, or is the point going on a journey and like, kind of like grappling with an idea? And I think so. I think I see our role as sort of like building a brand that represents and embodies a different set of ideals around what is valuable, right? Like what is valuable.
Yeah.
It's not just like output. It's experience, and it's not about making something fast. It's about making something wonderful. It's about celebrating the space like before the idea when you're just pondering. So I think a lot of it is just embodying these ideals and talking about them. I think from a product perspective, I really feel like we are headed to a world where the space before an idea, how an idea comes together, will become even more important, right?
Yeah.
It's the kind of stuff that is hard to articulate and subjective, but so much of the way we've built our society is around the kind of production of things. It's like the project management tool, the database tool. It's not really about celebrating the kind of nonlinear, the kind of divergence and exploration before anything tangible comes through. And so I feel like so much of what we are doing with our product is encouraging kind of exploration and connections and pondering and sense making. And, it's sort of like the answer of like where great ideas come from. And it really comes
Yeah.
from like sitting, pondering, banging your head against the wall.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can do in a kind of like industrial production line or factory. It requires a different kind
Yeah.
of like way of being.
Yeah, and I definitely think with like what we're seeing is AI becoming something it doesn't need to be. AI can enable us to be more creative and do less of the menial work, but right now it's just exploiting people. So I think it's really good to see an example of a company that's trying to demonstrate a different way that technology can exist. You should be using it to enhance human creativity, not to just like get more attention and more data out of people. Because I do feel very strongly about, as a designer, something that people don't really seem to question at all is that the end goal is always for your designs to be engaging. This is on a very like everywhere. I've gotten feedback before from jobs I didn't get, people saying, oh, well, your designs weren't engaging enough. That wasn't the point of this project. The point of this project wasn't to make something engaging. I was going for a different success metric, but it's seen as the default success metric. Personally, I think this always just lands us back at persuasive design. As long as users are engaged, nothing else matters. I think this really limits human creativity, and obviously you guys think about things differently. And like you say, so what would, if you're designing something and you're looking for a goal experience. So say I'm sitting here and I'm designing something, whatever it is, and I'm looking for, what's going through my head when I'm doing that is, what does success look like for each individual user? So what would you say the goal is when you're thinking about whatever it is? If it's the intricacies of a certain page and you're discussing that, what does success look like for that individual user?
Yeah, I love this question. I mean, first I want to address what you asked about designing for engagement, because I mean, it's such an important point. And I recently heard the founder of Duolingo be interviewed in a podcast where, he was asked basically, I'm like botching the exact words, but something along the lines of, there are some trade-offs between gamification and education. When forced to choose between one or the other, what do you do? And his answer is like, always choose engagement, because, an engaged user is at least there. So if the user isn't there, then, there's like, you can have the most like ethical and beautiful experience, but if nobody's using it, then what's the point? And so I do think like before kind of addressing and answering how we think about it, I think it's important to really consider that when you're designing consumer products, you have to like view humans as they really are and not as you wish they were, right?
Yeah.
Like the reality is that we live in a world where attention spans are so short. Everyone wants less friction. And so as much as we can sit here and, like idolize this kind of ideal world where, not everything was like one click convenience, like the reality shows that like people gravitate towards these things, and the same people
Yeah.
that complain about these things when given an alternative still default to Twitter and Amazon and, like TikTok or whatever. So it is a very kind of tricky and nuanced thing. That said, you asked a really great question, which is how do you kind of like think about what success looks like for individual users? And I think that we actually like think about it very differently in the sense that for us, engagement, at least engagement as measured by time spent on site, is completely irrelevant. So if you think about like Twitter, TikTok, all of these like scaled ad-based social media platforms, their single metric for success is minutes spent on site and daily active users, because their customer is the advertiser. And the
Yeah.
incentive is really to get as many eyeballs as possible. So for us, there is a trade-off, because I think Sublime will not reach ever the scale of a tool like TikTok or Twitter. But as a result of that, because it is not ad-based, because it is member supported, and because we don't think about it as a feed you consume, but rather as a tool you use, and I'll get into that in a second, then we really track two things. We track paying customers. So, it's like if you pay for Sublime, you're getting utility from it. And we track people actively building their library, which is very interesting because that's very different from passive consumption. We actually are completely blind to, there could be a million people on Sublime passively consuming content without building their library or paying for it, and we don't track it. It doesn't register, it doesn't affect us or how we build the tool. So it's interesting that if you think about like back in the day, or if you were to buy like a PC or an Apple computer, it was like this idea that you have to hook people and addict them is very new. Like you used to buy a PC and it's up to you. Maybe you use it 8 hours a day, maybe you use it 2 hours a day. Like you bought this service and then it's up to you to kind of like use it however you intend to. But now it's this really weird world where all the service is free, but the cost is your time and your life ultimately. And so I think that the incentives are just completely messed up when advertising is
Yeah.
the business model. But I think more kind of like to answer your question more specifically about what does success mean for a user on Sublime, I remember I got an email from somebody using Sublime and they said something to the effect of scrolling through Twitter led me to scrolling more and then feeling like emptiness and guilt. And scrolling through Sublime often made me like put away my phone and like get to work on that passion project that I like put
Yeah.
aside years ago.
Yeah.
And so that to me is like success is like, can we generate this feeling of awe, calm, like this state of being inspired, of feeling sublime that's going to make you want to create.
Yeah.
And I think it's a hard thing to measure, but at
Yeah.
least like we are incentivized to deliver that kind of utility because we don't care about eyeballs. We're just, like
Yeah.
Twitter can say that they care about users feeling creative, but that's just fundamentally
Yeah.
at odds with the mandate of like increasing minutes spent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I definitely, something I come across a lot is when you're building like an alternative kind of technology, how do you appeal to people in the attention economy whilst not straying from your principles? It's a really tricky balance to strike. And yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that. Yeah, it's a big problem, and honestly, I also think it's a problem on a level of content creators as well, not just on building technology. The more I create content, the more I see the parallels between my work as a UX designer and my work as someone who creates content on the internet. I think that there are a lot more things in common with those two activities than a lot of people seem to realize. Does the same thing. You're pushed to always prioritize virality and engagement over meaningful engagement with your ideas. That's the same thing that I feel pushed to do when I'm designing something. And there's certainly an extent of that. I want people to, when they're seeing a video I've made about something that I'm talking about in relation to technology, I want them to like be interested in it. And if I have to put my camera in front of my bookshelf instead of in front of a blank wall to get them interested, then cool, I'll do that. But I want them to actually meaningfully engage with the ideas. And it's the same thing when I'm designing. And I really like how Sublime encourages us to actually engage with things on a deeper level. So it's not like this is something I've spoken about when I've made videos about Sublime on my TikTok in the past. And I feel like often on TikTok, the goal is to keep scrolling. It's not to actually learn things. And when you're an educational influencer, that makes it tricky because people like your posts and it makes them feel good, and then you don't do anything with that information, which is why I'm trying to get everyone who follows me to download Sublime and follow me on there instead, because then you actually read the things I tell you to read and not just save the video in your favorites never to be seen again. I think often what it turns into in content creation is a popularity contest. I mean, we all know this. On Sublime, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like it's a popularity contest. It feels like people sitting in a room learning from one another, which is much more how my brain works, which is also why I like it as a neurodivergent person. The popularity contest thing really stresses me out. So you clearly have managed to create a space that fosters genuine creativity without turning it into a popularity contest. Do you have any thoughts on that on a creator level, or
Yeah. First of all, I really empathize with your point on how difficult it is to design products today, where people are just so uh, like time poor. Like they just don't give anything more than 5 seconds before. And so that's why I think we look at all of these tools and they all look the same. It's like the stories and the feed and there's just not a lot of room for novelty when it involves like rewiring your brain or anything that requires like spending like more than just a few minutes to try to understand something. Like unfortunately, like most people don't. And
yeah,
that's it's like ChatGPT. The technology had been there for a while, but it wasn't until it was put in a completely frictionless interface, which is chat, that it took off. And so there is this like just challenge with design where I think designers are constantly pushed to interfaces that are more familiar, that are frictionless, and that's a forever conversation that we're having daily. Like every time we're introducing new things, it's how do we kind of balance that? And I can talk about how we think about that design challenge, because I think Sublime specifically is a tool that it takes a while to understand it, or at least
yeah, that
understand
was my
it fully.
experience.
But once you understand it, it's like this world that is like enthralling, and the retention is incredible. And so that's
Yeah.
beautiful, but it means that we're just gonna grow a little bit slower, but it's gonna be beautiful, sustained growth because it's loyal growth. It's not just
Yeah.
one influencer downloads some kind of like fad app for a day and then like forget it.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of challenge. But I think to your point on like the popularity contest thing, I've sort of been changing my mind about this stuff a lot. I think last year I did a lot of like I was complaining a lot about social media. I feel like that was just my personality was like social media sucks. And I sort of like came to like the realization like maybe not too long ago that complaining is boring. That it just like especially if I'm going to complain about it and then still use it. Like the fact that
Yeah.
I continue to return to these
Complaining about social media on social media.
on social media, right?
In
It's
my
like
comment section as well, all the time. It's like, okay, what are you doing here then?
it's like the most ironic thing. And so it made me wonder like why is it that I complain about it? And I think like Lou, where I've landed is the analogy that works for me is I think that social media has a place in society, right? Like in the same way that if you like the town square has a place, right? If you go to a city,
Yeah.
there's a town square. There might be a place like Times Square in New York City where there's a bunch of ads and there's a lot of people and it's a lot of noise. And like it serves a function. It's, like I've been there, it's great, but I don't go there to write a book. I don't
Yeah.
go there to kind of engage deeply with ideas. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll go to a coffee shop. Maybe I'll take a walk down Central Park. I really feel like if we start looking at the internet as digital architecture, it's like we have built like the town square where everyone's there and everyone's kind of broadcasting and yelling and like all of this stuff. And that serves a function, you know? But I think we need more options. Like where do we
Yeah.
go when we want to go deeper with ideas?
Yeah.
Where do we and so what is the equivalent of that like neighborhood coffee shop on the internet? So I guess where I've landed is like complain less about what's there. It's like, yes, that's there, that serves a function. I don't think Sublime competes with that. I think our value
No, I
proposition
don't think so
is
either.
completely different. It's like I think that it's like I sometimes go to like bars and sometimes I'll go to libraries and sometimes I'll go to parks, and those are all a part of my life. And I think we have to kind of start thinking about our kind of digital experiences in that way of what is my intention when I use this tool? Like, yes, I use Twitter for entertainment and I use it sometimes to get my news, but I'm not going to use it as a place to get inspiration when I want to create. I'm not going to use it
Yeah.
when I feel uplifted. So, yeah, so I guess like for me, like Sublime is that place that is designed to be the place that you go to when you want to create and feel inspired and deepen your ideas and your intentions. And it's great, but it serves a very different function than if I'm standing in line at Starbucks for 5 minutes and I just want like shallow entertainment. Like I'm not going to go to Sublime for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I also think everyone does need to go through their hating social media phase. I certainly went through that phase when I was starting to write my undergrad dissertation on this. That was the point I started from. And the more I read more literature and the more I remembered everything I'd learned the last 3 years of my degree, I was like, I think that there's an alternative way to do this. I don't think that the solution to this is just shout at teenagers all the time. I think that there's a different approach, and I think that interestingly, the attention grabbing headlines about how bad social media is are also a product of the attention economy themselves. This was something I wrote about in my dissertation, how they mirror the exact same structure as any kind of hook you in kind of content, but because they're screaming about the hook you in content, not enough people pick up on that. But I also think it was important for me to go through that phase of really hating social media. My turning point was when my younger brother was starting to explore social media and I was noticing the impact it was having on him, and I was like, I like know exactly why this is happening and my parents have no idea what's going on in his brain, and I could tell you because I read it in a textbook. And then I was like, I don't think that that's shouting at him is not going to resolve that problem because I know what's going on in his brain. So that's how I came to the sort of informing technology perspective. But that's what led me to all of this. And I guess what the question I'm trying to figure out at the moment is what I think the future of social media should look like. I guess you've kind of answered that question already, talking about this idea of a digital infrastructure. And I really resonate with that idea because it's kind of like everywhere is the town square, but it's also controlled by a billionaire, and there's like no space to go anywhere. But something like TikTok, for example, the reason I'm still on there is because there's something about their discovery, the way that people are discovered on there, that I think is quite valuable. And I'm a designer, I'm not a developer, so I can tell you exactly what that is or how it works. But there's something about the way that I find people on there and the way that people find me on there that I think is extremely valuable and bringing us to different perspectives. Obviously, it's flawed because their algorithm prioritizes people who are privileged over people who aren't based on stupid engagement metrics again. So, yeah, do you have any other ideas of what the future of social media looks like? Or,
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I think if you think about like TikTok and Twitter and Instagram, I think they're not really social media anymore. It's more like
yeah,
user broadcasted media or something. It's like you don't
yeah,
really go there to socialize. It's like entertainment. It's like the 1% of creators creating content to entertain the 99%. And that is just so different from the kind of early days of social media where you were posting for your friends. And so I think people like realize, these platforms realize that people don't necessarily like want to like get content from their friends, that like a TikTok for you feed is going to be more addictive and more engaging from a purely like media perspective than your friends. So I guess it's like interesting to think about how these platforms are evolving, in the sense that to me they're broadcast platforms, they're media platforms, they're not necessarily social. And so there is this like
yeah,
big vacuum of like what is social. And so I think a
yeah,
lot of social is going to be more fragmented communities, right? Like I think that, whether it's like Discord and Slack and, IRL communities, like there's just going to be a lot more fragmentation. I think that I genuinely think it's hard for me to wrap my head around the idea that we will see another super scaled social media network to the scale of
yeah,
like Facebook, Instagram, whatever. I feel like that's kind of run its course. These are there, they're here to stay. I think their relevance will, they'll probably stay somewhat relevant, but I think that people will start to seek other kind of like corners of the internet to connect with people, to engage in ways that are not performative. And I think Sublime is kind of like part of that pluralism of, it's not just like we are all expected to go to this one place that serves everything and flattens all interactions. It's, these places serve a need, but there's this like fragmentation of other places that people are connecting in different ways. And I would say like Sublime is like, it's not really like, it's not like a Slack community that is
Yeah.
super kind of conversational. So I think there's a need for conversational interfaces. Like for me, the kind of the spirit of Sublime is more alone but together. It's how do I do the things that I would do alone, but in this like inside of this like network where I feel like I'm in the presence of other people, where I feel less alone. But it's not like the platform. There are no likes, there are no comments. It's a lot more quiet. So I guess like I don't look at the world anymore and like through like in a binary way. I think the future is like a multitude of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's also the limits of this idea about social media evil, those kind of headlines. Because what that does is it actually prevents you from thinking about it in any kind of serious way, and it prevents you from being optimistic about things. The reason I started out reading those things because it seemed like it made the most logical sense based on my experience. But like, I'm a designer, my degree was in interaction design, that's what I was studying at the time, and I was like, this isn't quite resonating with me because I think technology can be something different. And that's how I started to encounter those perspectives about human optimism. Be like optimistic. Like actually, like one of the first things I wrote was called Your Users Aren't Lazy. And it's this idea that you're always having to assume that people want to do less, but maybe people don't want to do less. Maybe people want to do more. They want to talk to one another more. They want to feel passionate about something. And if you give them that opportunity in the right way, we can see, I hate the word decentralized because I feel like it's been co-opted a wee bit by some like slightly more right-wing actors that I'm not a huge fan of. And I also think it has to, I mean, I'm extremely left wing. I think it has to come in line with regulation. I don't think we can have these things unless there's like mass regulation of technology, to be honest. And the industry, like, I would love to sit here and say we can just hope that people discover this. But I think that this needs to be enabled by regulation. And even like the idea of a digital town square is a great one, but that has to be publicly owned. You can't have a digital town square that's owned by a corporation. It just won't work. And like you said, it also needs to be localized. Even local kind of digital town square type platforms aren't without their problems. If you've ever been on one, you'll know exactly what I mean. It just descends into neighbors arguing with one another about bins like really quickly. So it's not always a good thing, but not all aspects of humanity are. Sometimes we do argue about the bins. Maybe we could do that on the internet instead. But yeah, I think it's all about like distancing yourself from the sort of reaction of huge negativity to show yourself what technology can actually be. That's what I try to advocate for on the internet. People don't always listen, but that's part of
Yeah.
that's part of
I
the
think you're like, there's definitely some big questions about power when it comes to,
yeah.
like there's definitely a monopoly on our attention that is held by like, five white rich men in Silicon Valley. It's like
Yeah.
that is the truth. I guess like maybe like I don't know, my belief is that I think a lot of people attribute to evil what is just like bad incentives. Like I don't
Yeah.
think anybody at Facebook is waking up being like, I am going to like, like destroy democracy
Yeah.
or something like that. I think it's like, I need to get a bonus so I could take my family on vacation, and my bonus is contingent on delivering on this metric, and this metric is contingent on like
Yeah.
more user views, and we need more user views because of our advertising model, and like that's all incentives. So I
Yeah.
think it's a little bit less like, less like good and evil than I
Yeah.
think than I think is easy to believe when
Hmm.
because the narrative of like like social media whatever is evil, like I just think it's a lot more complex than that. And I'm I'm not like an expert in regulation and all that stuff, but I definitely think that it's just like there's a lot of like thorny issues. But I think I came to a similar conclusion than you did, in the sense that I think it like complaining is like doesn't allow you to kind of like make a difference. And so when I said like yes, I can complain about the internet, or I could say like, what is like one thing that I feel could use my strengths and my skills to deliver a better experience for a set
Hmm.
of people. And like, a year ago it was just a few people. Now it's many thousands of people, and over time, I think it can grow. And so, I don't know. I think that optimism is like a verb that I
Yeah,
constantly try to like
yeah.
practice. Is like, how do I carry myself into a state of mind where I'm not just like complaining, but
Hmm.
actively like being a part of like solutions, knowing
Hmm.
that solutions are not, it's not just one thing. These are complex things that require millions of different actions by millions of different kinds of people. But it's like, what is my lane? What is the lane
Hmm.
in which I can make a difference? And I think for me, that's continuing to build Sublime with our values at the center.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you on that, and I think something I didn't really consider until I think earlier this year really was the way in which it all kind of lends itself to conspiracy thinking. I read Doppelganger by Naomi Klein when it first came out because I've read all of her books, and I guess I always agreed with it. I just wasn't very strict about it. But yeah, you're right. It's not like some conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy. It's don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence, or
Yeah.
even if that incompetence is you're not going out and actively seeking to deconstruct your assumptions the way your professors told you to when you did that degree, because they definitely told you to do that, because they all do that. Like, I've been in those classes, they never stop talking about deconstructing your assumptions, and I know that's not a new thing, it's across the board. If you do any kind of tech degree, it's something people talk about constantly. And yeah, don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence, or maybe you're like, all right, that's very well and good, but I need to be able to support myself, so I'm just going to do this anyway. And the different ways in which everyone justifies that, like over rationality, like, oh well, people can just tune out of this with their willpower if they want to, so it's fine. And none of that's a conspiracy. It's not malice. It's the way our system works, and I think attributing morality to it is not
Yeah.
helpful.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's one of my favorite quotes of all time. I think to your point on conspiracy theory, I mean, I really do think that there's a kind of medium is the message,
Yeah.
sort of thing. And when you're on Twitter or on TikTok, nothing is really meant to be reflected on. Everything, like the system is designed for hot takes that are attention grabbing, and there is not a lot of like fact checking or really kind of reflecting on it. And the way that the algorithm works is it's designed to feed you more of what like enrages you basically, or or engages you, which is
Yeah.
often, unfortunately, the things that engage us are usually not the more nuanced things. It's the things that have more of
Yeah.
an emotional charge. And so I think that so much of the kind of like spirit of Sublime is, I view the world as, I don't think the world is black or white. I think the world is shades of gray. And I think that to really understand what you think, you have to kind of slowly marinate on ideas, connect them over time. It's like this slow process of understanding something. And I think that social media sort of like removes that experience from us, because it's like, oh, I see this hot take, it's like perfectly designed to be this like, fortune cookie style thing that I can repost, and it sounds amazing, but it like, upon further thinking, it makes no sense or something.
Yeah.
But it's like, but the platforms are not really meant to do that. It's like one post about my, but like about like somebody's dog dying, another post about like the election, another post about some murder, and it's like our brains are not really designed to deal with that like
Yeah.
chaos. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. I think for me, like, I don't really know what I think until I've had a lot of time to think, and so
Hmm.
that's kind of like why the things that I add to my Sublime library, I don't always agree with them, but it's like
Yeah.
this is what I need to digest before I have an opinion.
Hmm.
And in some ways, like, yeah, I just feel like we just all need so much of that. It's the you're not allowed to have an opinion until you can articulate the other side's opinion
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
make, you know?
That's very present in my comment section sometimes, and I can be a bit curt with people sometimes, because honestly, like, if I'm sitting here explaining to you ideas that I've read in a book based on people who've studied this their whole lives, and you're saying, well, I disagree based on vibes. What do you
Yeah.
mean? You don't like.
Yeah,
I
totally.
think. Yeah, the equal access is given people. I don't like, I think we should all have an opinion, but I think there should be more of a standard of, well, this person has spent their entire career studying this, so maybe I should listen to them.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the thing about social media. It's complete context collapse. There's so little friction to posting that, somebody can comment on something and it's not like you're sitting across a dinner table with somebody where you have time to actually exchange ideas in a fruitful way. So, yeah, it's like the medium is the message there. It's like dunking is like encouraged by the medium.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just think it's so counterproductive, and I think my neurodivergent brain struggles to understand why people would do that sometimes because I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Which is a part of the problem, is why I get into arguments in my comment section. But I've been better at not doing that because I'm creating content that avoids it. And like honestly, if you're like me and you create content, just delete them. Just delete them. Don't just delete the comments. It's your comment section. You can do that. And if it's not going to add any value, goodbye. So that's definitely part of it for me. And it's also why, I mean, of my followers and mutuals that I know have downloaded Sublime since I've been recommending it, it's like I know you guys actually want to read the stuff that I am recommending. Maybe you don't quite get round to that, but not everyone seems to be prepared to do that, which is definitely part of the problem.
Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, I have young children and I grew up reading books, but they're growing up like, just like the media, like for me, the first time I looked at, Instagram stories, I was way older, but this is the kind of like, they're growing up with short form. So
Yeah.
I do worry about our ability to like sustain our concentration for longer periods of time.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways like you can fight that, but I also, I mean, I don't know, this is definitely like a very alive question for me right now because my preferred medium to communicate ideas is long form. Like I
Yeah.
thrive on
Big
Substack, but
email
it's like
fan.
how many people are not learning or about Sublime because we're not in these kind of short form environments, right? So I do think that it's this kind of nuanced thing where we have to learn to communicate in the way that like culture wants us to communicate, which is like shorter and shorter. But I also, yeah, I also think that there is this kind of like appetite for like there's this like the opposite of a good idea is also a good idea. And so we're gonna see extremes where people will listen to 3-hour podcasts or 30-second TikToks. And like the in
I've been
between
guilty
is
of
like
that in the past, to be
anything that
honest. I'm a big fan of like 3 hour video essays on really obscure topics. And then like sometimes I'll just scroll on TikTok for quite a while. I do love the like there's one that I always reference. I don't. This is quite niche. There's one that I always reference when I'm explaining this hobby of mine to people, and it's this 3 hour video on Snape wives by like some obscure YouTuber, and it's a bunch of women in the early 2000s who convinced themselves that were married to Snape from. Anyway, it's a whole thing, and
wow.
she delves into like the ways in which religion exists in the digital age and the ways that this
Yeah.
created this phenomenon. And I sat there and I watched the whole thing. So I also think part of the, I think this is what a lot of young people are doing is they're seeing that you can appeal to people by making a video on something that's pop culture-y and explaining how actually this is connected to all these ideas. And the juxtaposition of those two things can really reel people in. It
Yeah.
certainly reels me in. I also, to be fair, that does also waste my time sometimes. That's not always super productive. But in essence, I do really like the kind of content that's the juxtaposition between like deep philosophical ideas explaining some weird cult of people that convince themselves they were married to a character from a fictional book.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, so I'm
Yeah,
a big fan of that. Yeah,
because it's like I do think I mean I don't have like the data to support this, but it's a weird world in which yes, people want short form stuff, but I'm sure that there's some data that supports it. Like we also are willing to go really deep down rabbit holes, uh,
yeah,
and like stay on for hours. And so yeah, I don't know. I guess it's like a both are true situation.
yeah, definitely. I think that's also the thing about optimism. People are interested in long form content. I mean, there has been more 3 hour video essays on obscure topics popping up all over the place, but it's also about, is this an chamber problem? Do I think that this is happening because all my friends are the type of people who are also going to watch a 3 hour video on Snape Wives? Maybe, probably. Is everyone doing that? No. Then the other point about like reading and long form content, I think has been a really dramatic shift really, really quickly. Like I'm 23 and my brother's 17, and the difference is deeply, deeply strange to me and to my mom as well. We're both like, that's actually, it's kind of like happened like that. Like people have, I think people also forget with people my age, it's not like we weren't around that kind of technology at a very young age actually. iPads didn't exist till we were like till I was like 9, I think, and my dad had one, and I was the only person in my class who had an iPad in the house, and this was me at 10. So I think people also misunderstand my relationship with technology, but being this age, the thing I've noticed is the shift has been, it's within a couple of years there was a
Yeah.
huge shift.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, listen, I don't think it's all bad in the sense that I think there are a lot of books in the past that should have been essays. And there's a lot
Yeah,
of essays that should have been
airport
tweets.
books,
You
yeah.
know? So yeah, and actually one of the kind of like founding principles of Sublime is, and if you notice on Sublime, when you highlight something on the internet, it appears in your library as a card. That highlight becomes a card. And that card is still connected to the source. And if you click on it, you could see like other things that have been highlighted for that article or that
Yeah,
book. It's all deeply connected. But really, if you kind of zoom into that decision of like every kind of highlight is a standalone card, it's because I believe that books don't change lives, sentences
yeah,
do. It's
yeah.
like you have to get to the atomic unit of the insight because that's what people remember, you know? And so I don't know, I think that one of the big kind of decisions that we made with Sublime was just like making the atomic unit the insight. And it sounds like I mean, you would appreciate this as a product designer, but it impacts like the entire information architecture.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Yeah. No, I definitely get what you're going for there. I do think it's like, yeah, there's like long form content that should have just been a sentence. You didn't need to say all that. And I think also that's, yeah, turning back to optimism, it's an opportunity for people to really delve into long form content that actually matters. If we're looking for sort of a return to that, what I think is actually more important, as is became clear in this conversation, is asking ourselves what should be long form content, what should we spend a lot of time thinking about, and what is it that's just a quick bite of information? Where's the separation there, and what ideas should be which, and how should they intersect with one another? And obviously, you're answering all those questions for the rest of us, so that's great.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey.
Yeah,
Yeah, we don't have all the answers, but yeah, but I think so much of the kind of questions that you touch on are really at the heart of it, like questions about, like, I really think that everyone using products should interrogate the motivation behind those products. Like, who
yeah,
started, why did they start this? What do they want from it? And, I think that for us, like, so much of the like motivation is like we just wanted something for ourselves that didn't
yeah,
exist. And so I'm less kind of like if Sublime becomes really big, like great, but my loyalty for it is not a function of the scale. It's
yeah,
like I want this to exist for myself. I want to build a sustainable business that is meaningful for the people it serves. And, of course it has to be sustainable, but like our motivation is not like go big or go home. It's not conquer the world or die in a fire.
yeah,
That so much of the kind of like early internet was built with this like mindset of like infinite scale. And I think for us, it's like the goal is more resonance than scale,
yeah.
right? And I just think that's like a profound shift around like the fact that your products on the internet can reach everyone does not mean that they should.
Yeah, yeah. I just like it's bizarre that everyone's on the same platforms. I just feel like that's not a good idea to start with. And then there's also the limits of decentralized platforms leading to extremism. But that's all a little kind of sidetracked, I guess. But yeah, I think I mean, I agree with everything you've said so far. I said at the start, maybe about things we disagree, but evidently we don't disagree on much. Um, yeah. So before we go, is there anything you're working on right now at Sublime? Do you want to talk about what's coming next and what your
Yeah.
goals
Okay.
are?
So interesting. So let me see. What can I say? So interestingly, last year, end of 2023, I wrote an end of year letter, and the letter was called "After the Ecstasy, the Laundry." And that comes from a quote from this like meditation teacher called Jack Cornfield. And the whole idea of it is like you have this vision for a more sublime internet, that's like the ecstasy, but the laundry is like the utility. It's like get the browser
Yeah.
right and make sure you can add stuff and like make sure that like, you know, because you can be drunk on on a vision, but like if the product doesn't work, then like, you
Yeah.
know, the point of the vision. And so I think so a lot of like what we've spent this year and we'll continue to spend time doing is like narrow the gap between the vision and the product. So there's a lot to do there. I think that something that's really been working for us is this combination of talk about the vision, like the way I'm talking to you about it, the way I kind of write about it. Like I'm going on a lot of podcasts, I'm talking to a lot of people about it, and that's all great, but make sure that you're also deepening the utility. So let me maybe share one thing on deepening the utility in terms of what we're working on next. So there's two big milestones coming up for Sublime. The first is a public launch. So we've actually are still in private beta. It's Sublime is invite only. So it, you know, it's as we've built the product, we just wanted to build it in a kind of smaller community so we could take our time to build the product right. But we're launching publicly in Q1. So that's one. The other piece of it is if you think about Sublime as a place to collect and connect ideas and share ideas and create with your ideas, then everything is really downstream of being able to collect ideas easily on Sublime. And
Yeah.
so much of the feedback that we got from people is a lot of ideas are stuck in formats like audio, like podcasts,
Yeah.
where you listen to a 2-hour podcast and there's like, you know, one clip that really resonated, but it's like hard to capture that one clip because it's like stuck in a 2-hour podcast. So all this to say, we have a really great solution for that.
Yeah.
And we are going to be launching that also early next year. And it's basically just a way to capture insights, starting with podcasts super easily, add them to your Sublime library, but it feels super magical. So, you know, like I mentioned before, Sublime is a product that you have to kind of like, it takes a little bit of time to fully click and understand. But this kind of product that I'm talking about, the kind of podcast capture, is so delightful and immediate. And so I sort of see our journey as reconciling the like vision with the utility, the lack of friction with the things that take time to kind of truly understand. It's really kind of like embracing the
Yeah.
nuance and the both are true, which I think is just like I guess reflects like my personality in some way.
Yeah. No, I definitely think also when people only ever see the side of it that's the vision and the end product, they don't realize all of the like all of the intricacies that go into it. And I think that's kind of where my degree helps out there because I studied interaction design. So what my brain is kind of ended up defaulting at is focusing on all the little small things that need done to build the vision. Like everyone talks like is like, oh, your ideas are always great. And I don't mean to big myself up here. I hate doing that. But it is a comment I get a lot. Like, I really appreciate your insights. It's like, yeah, that's because I wake up to read my nonfiction books for an hour before work every day. Like, it's not, like you have to do that to, and not like in a hustle culture way. I think it's about reframing that as creative practice for me. And that's maybe just my ADHD. I'm not motivated by hustle culture in the slightest. I need to be enjoying something or I will not do it. And there's really no two ways about it. So for me, it's about like, I guess the process, romanticizing the process and letting the process be creative and enjoyable. And yeah, bridging
Yeah.
that gap is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I love, yeah, I think I feel like that background in interactive design is so handy because so many, like so many of the ideas and challenges we have can only be untangled in a prototype, in looking at
Yeah.
the pixels, and like, you know, it's like there's only so much that you can talk about in the abstract. The rest you actually have to like resolve, like inside of the idea, inside of the Figma file, inside of the kind of prototype. And so I just love designers for that reason.
Yeah, that's
You're not
what I find
inside.
frustrating. That's what I find frustrating about a lot of the academic research that I engage with, and I understand the value of it. But I'm like, okay, so what's your suggestion then? What
Yes,
do you think we should
exactly.
do about this? Because that's what my brain always defaults to. Okay, so
Totally.
what's the solution? How can I make a little picture that shows people what the solution is? Because that gets people actually understanding it better. Is what's always going through in my brain. And it just frustrates me when other people don't think like that. Obviously, we need people who think in lots of different types of ways, but being in the tech space and engaging with a lot of theory is slightly frustrating sometimes, and that's all like a broader issue about the gap between design theory and design practice that has existed since as long as design's existed, from what I can gather.
Yeah, I mean, I feel similarly to you. I feel like the people whose jobs is just to theorize, but don't actually like let those ideas collide with reality. I just have a hard time really kind of engaging with that stuff so deeply
Yeah.
because there's so many things that work in practice, but not in theory, you know?
Yeah.
And, and so, yeah, I don't know. I feel like, I think it was Steve Jobs maybe that once said something about like the most amazing people are the thinker doers because they're not just like thinking and they're not just like doing. It's like the people that can both like think really deeply, but also like do stuff versus just like theorize about stuff. And yeah, I guess like to me, that's a lot of the spirit of Sublime is like people that are idea obsessed. They love the world of ideas, but it's like, don't just like get stuck there. It's like take
Yeah.
ideas and like do something concrete with them, whether it's like,
Yeah.
it could be like build a recipe book, a children's book, like start a podcast, like have a conversation, build a company, like design a product. It's like, I don't know, I just love the idea of like synthesizing into like something tangible just because I really think that what makes us as humans fulfilled and happy is like creation. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you are a creator on TikTok, but the vast majority of people are just in like stuck in this like passive consumption mode. And
You
so,
need
I
to
mean,
get
we're
over the
just
fear, I think. I mean, I was a pretty embarrassing child. I did a lot of silly things and people made fun of me sometimes. So I think I got over that fear at pretty a young age, and I think the bullying has maybe helped. I don't know if I'd call it bullying, but I was distinctly aware that people thought I was weird. And that's definitely helped. But yeah, I resonate with all of that, absolutely. It's just, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot because I have young kids, and like so much of when you're young, you have this like pressure to fit in, but it's like as an adult, you need to stand out,
Yeah.
and I feel like being weird when you're young is like yes, it's like it's uncomfortable when you're young, but it's like perfectly prepares you for adulthood because like that is the
Yeah.
stuff that makes you stand out and like makes you more comfortable, and I guess you're a case study of that. I would say.
I was definitely, yeah, I was quite a weird child. Absolutely. And I also, yeah, it's just people that don't do stuff with their ideas get on my nerves. And I think it's also about kind of reshaping the way we think about the dichotomy between like technology, STEM, and art and humanities. I don't think those like need to be two separate things
Yeah,
necessarily. I
yeah.
firmly believe that every computer science student should read Frankenstein before they graduate. That's my opinion, strong opinion. Because I read Frankenstein for the first time, and I don't know how, because I've been a big reader my whole life. I only read it for the first time in summer, and I was like, this is just describing every single tech bro I have ever met. That like this is
Wow.
textbook, the same thing.
Wow.
They should all read this.
That's an incredible
Um,
insight. Now I want to like read Frankenstein.
Yeah, I found it quite. I was like, oh, okay. That I kind of assumed. I was surprised by it because I thought I would have came across that kind of analysis of it before. But yeah, it's the thinker doer thing. I think definitely.
Yeah, but I mean, it's I love that you bring up this kind of like we're all multifaceted beings. We are not like engineers. We are not writers. We are multitude of things. We contain like multiplicities, and I think that it's been interesting to see how Sublime appeals to such a diverse range of people, whether they identify as coders or writers, and because I think it's like we all like creativity is a universal thing. It's not confined to the artists. And I don't know. I just feel like that's a lot of the kind of like the energy that I want Sublime to have as a tool is we are all creative no matter what we do, no matter what the day job is.
Yeah, definitely. It's also there's something I've been trying to do in my Substack recently is because I think a lot of people engage with my theory on Substack. Not a lot of people, but more people than I expected, which is great. But I want to emphasize, like, if you're following me, I like this. I'm a solutions oriented person, so I start including like a little prototype of something at the end of my Substack essays. I've only really done it in my most recent one, but it's something I'm going to do like pretty much all the time. I think I also really enjoyed doing it. So there's lots of different ways people can incorporate that, is my point, into your creative practice.
For
Think
sure.
about how you can make a little picture, even if it's just making a little picture. Um,
Amazing. Well, this has been really fun.
yeah, it has been. Yeah, it's been great talking to you.